Hi, and welcome to Managing for Results, Requests, Offers, and Commitments, a training webinar for leaders, managers, and supervisors from Insight Coaching. My name is Charles Feltmen. In this course, we will cover a language and process for making clear, strong commitments and greatly increasing the likelihood that those commitments are kept. Material in this course comes from several sources, including the work of Chris Argyris, Fernando Flores, Bob Dunham, Rafael Echeverria, Julio Olaya, John Cyril, and Terry Winograd, among others. There are three elements to this webinar: concepts, information, and exercises. Exercises are on slides with a blue background. You will get the greatest value from this course if you do the exercises. They support your learning by giving you a direct experience of the concepts and information presented. You'll need a piece of paper and a pen or pencil to do the exercises. In this webinar, we're going to look at what are sometimes called conversations for action. These include making requests and offers, responding to requests and offers, and making commitments or promises to do specific things. They're called conversations for action because they initiate and drive the actions we collectively call work. When groups of people coordinate their actions effectively, we say they are working well together. People who work well together don't always succeed at everything they do, but people who don't work well together almost always fail. Not only that, people who do work well together enjoy their work for the most part, while those who don't are generally miserable on their way to failing. Having effective conversations for action is critical to achieving individual and collective success. Doing conversations for action well, I have found after years of working with groups and teams and individual leaders and whole companies, is one of the keys to success, both success and well-being at work. However, as this slide is attempting to convey, requests, offers, responses, and commitments are conversations between individuals. When those individual conversations for action are aligned with the shared mission, vision, and values of the larger organization, they take on much greater power. When they're not aligned with this larger shared purpose, we can still get stuff done based on the commitments between individuals. I'll do this because my boss, or my teammate, or my colleague over in marketing asked me to. But add to that a belief that we are all committed to and working towards a larger shared purpose, and those individual commitments to action are strengthened enormously. This strength comes from aligning requests and commitments with the larger purpose. Without this alignment, people can work at cross purposes and hamper achieving their goals. Conversations for action include requests, offers, responses, and commitments. Requests begin the process, and the outcome, when these conversations are done well, is that actions are taken that lead to desired results. Again, it's important that the intended results of these actions are aligned with the desired outcomes of the team, the department, and the larger organization. This flowchart is intended to give an overview of the entire request-response commitment process. There are two actors, if you will, in this process: a customer and a customer or requester, the person who's making the request in the first place, who initiates the process, and a performer who takes action to fulfill the request. And notice these are two people. It can also be two teams or two groups, but there should be an individual who represents each. So really this is a conversation between two individuals at some very basic level. As you can see, Between the request and completion of the action, there are other important steps, including a response to the request, a commitment, and other follow-on conversations that may be necessary. In this webinar, we will look at each of these steps separately, beginning with the request. A request is the starting point for generating action. When a request is effective, it increases the likelihood the entire process will have a good outcome. There are three basic forms a request can come in, depending on the power relationship between customer and performer. For example, a supervisor typically gives direction or issues commands to his or her subordinates. When an employee asks for something from a supervisor or a senior manager, on the other hand, it's usually more like making a plea. Somewhere in the middle, people who are relative peers make requests of each other. In other words, an individual with a higher rank typically has more flexibility to say no to the request without experiencing adverse consequences. However, we will talk more about the value of being able to say no, no matter what your rank is, when we cover responses to requests. But whether you call it a request, command, direction, a plea, what you say should always contain the same information. So, let's start by doing a little exercise here to highlight the information contained in an effective request. We typically initiate work we can't or don't want to do ourselves by asking someone else to do it. Not making them, but asking them. They go off and do whatever it is, and things go forward. But how well you make your request can have a big impact on how efficient and effective the work gets done and what the ultimate outcome is. So take out your piece of paper and pen and, as the instruction says, write out a request. It can be either one you've recently made or one you plan to make of someone in the near future. If you want to go for extra credit, or extra learning if you will, you can use a request you made recently that did not produce the results you intended or hoped for. In any case, write it out just as you said or planned to say it. If you made your request via email, or will be doing it via email, write it again just as you did the email. If you need extra time, you can pause the video and restart it when you're ready. And if you do need extra time, now would be the time to pause the video. So let's now take a look at the 5 elements of a complete, clear request. And by the way, these elements are described in detail in The Thin Book of Trust, an essential primer for building trust at work. The first element is the customer. That's the person who's making the request. And it should be clear who the customer is. And usually it is. If I ask you to do something, it's me asking. But sometimes I might ask on behalf of someone else. And it's important that you know, as the intended performer, that you know who that other person is, because that's the person you're going to be performing for. Another important question is the person who is making the request committed to their request? If you've ever done something for someone, say for example, put together a report, and the request was that you have it on someone's desk by 10 o'clock on Thursday morning, and so you went through all the things you needed to do and got it ready and took it in and put it on the desk only to find that that person has been on vacation for 2 days already and won't be back until the following week. You know they're not going to be using it. That's an example of someone who is not committed, at least to the deadline for the request. So customer is the first element. The second element is performer. Who is the intended performer? Who's being asked to do something? Now that again may seem obvious. If you ask me, I'm the person who's going to be who you're asking, who's going to be doing the work, whatever it is. But have you ever heard someone say, for example, we need to do such and such? In that, there's a request, but it's not at all clear who the intended performer is. They haven't said, will you please do this for us? We need this to happen. Will you please do it? So making that clear is, even if you think it should be clear when you're making the request, it is important to actually say who your intended performer is. And then also, is that the right person? Does that person have the capacity, the time, the skills, the information, the resources to do what you're asking them to do? The third element is the action. What you want this person to do. It can be something very simple. Can you please go get my calendar off my desk? It can be something that is quite complex and has multiple parts to it. But whatever it is, it should be clear. And it also should be what the customer needs. Sometimes, in fact quite often, I have experienced people making requests for something, and then when they get what they asked for, they realize that it really wasn't what they need. So if you are the customer, if you're the person making the request, before you actually make it, think through, if this gets done as I'm asking, will it get me what I need? The fourth element is what I call conditions of satisfaction. How will the customer and the performer know the request has been done to the customer's satisfaction? So an example of conditions of satisfaction might be well, actually I will go through the whole example in a few moments. But conditions of satisfaction are things like what form you want this to be done in or delivered in, what should it look like, length, width, breadth, etc. We'll go back to this again in a little bit more detail in a moment. And finally, time frame. By when? And ASAP is not a real time frame. In fact, before we go any further, I want to comment briefly on including a time frame in requests. When I work with teams and groups around using conversations for action effectively, people will often object to giving a time frame or a deadline. The concern is usually that it sounds slightly rude or presumptuous, and that it might be nicer or more polite to say something like, as soon as you can, or when do you think you could get it done by? The problem with this is that then the performer is left having to make up the time frame, especially if it's something like as soon as possible or when you can get to it. The performer is left to make up a time frame that may not be anything like the time frame that the customer has in his or her mind. So it's critical to put in a time frame, and we'll cover that again a little bit more on that again in a few moments.